Now, when we think about the processes that relate to incident response, these high level procedures that help guide us through the different phases or activities of managing and responding to an incident, there are often a few schools of thought. And I always say, schools of thought is not the best way to put it because in reality, most IR frameworks out there closely share many similarities to each other, maybe with some slight variances in verbosity that we'll get into. But really, having a solid incident response framework is really going to set the foundation for your ability to effectively handle incidents. And as we move throughout the course, we're going to be building up experience through various phases of the general incident response process. And so, like I was saying, it's important to differentiate, some of the most well-known incident response frameworks that are used in the field today. And first off, we have the IR framework that comes out of NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And NIST is a US federal agency that researches, develops, and maintains a number of measurement standards for science and technology to enable things like quality assurance and regulatory practices. Right? And so while NIST is not explicitly focused on developing cybersecurity standards, for example, they're also known for developing national standards for units of measurement or material science and manufacturing. But it's also very well known for its work in helping organizations better understand, manage, and reduce their cybersecurity risk and respond to incidents. And for a long time now, NIST guidelines for incident response have been detailed in the NIST Special Publication 800-61 Revision 2, or the Computer Security Incident Handling Guide. And this model is a very time-tested, tried and true and commonly agreed upon incident response model that provides a structured and repeatable process for organizations to prepare for, detect, contain, eradicate, and importantly, recover from security incidents while also facilitating continuous improvement through post-incident lessons learned. And again, it's a very common model, and so you've likely seen it somewhere before, right? Maybe you've even been tested on it before, or maybe you've adapted it within your organization or within your incident response team. And so really, again, it's quite simple, this model. We have 4 different stages, if you want to call them that. We have preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery, and then finally the post-incident activity. And so really, it's quite simple, but it's what goes into these steps that really matters and what really helps us guide through, the identification of incidents, the detection and analysis of them, being able to quarantine threats and remove them from affected systems, and recover back to a known good state and then learn from our response, right? What went well or what didn't, or, what were we unprepared for? And you can see these handy arrows here that sort of map back to each phase, right? We really have this feedback loop where basically all of these steps are going to be interconnected in some way in this sort of chain, right? So what we learn or what we identify or discover during our detection goes into how we actually respond and eradicate threats, right? And we might pivot off and discover additional elements, or our scope might change and grow. And so we're using what we learn from containing and eradicating threats to potentially detect new ones, right? Or maybe discover things like lateral movement, right? Meaning our scope has grown, it's changed. And so we have to repeat the cycle of detecting, analyzing, and recovering, right? And so we spend a lot of time between these second and third phases as they're really critical in mitigating that whack-a-mole response scenario and really ensuring that we recover strategically. Additionally, the lessons learned from our analysis and response feed back into our preparation for next time, right? Maybe we found gaps in our continuous monitoring, or maybe there was an evidence source that we didn't quite have the capability to collect or analyze effectively in the moment. Or as we talked about earlier, we can really start to operationalize the malicious indicators and attack patterns that we've identified and analyzed during the incident and turn it into threat intelligence that we can use to hunt and detect future intrusions. Right? And so we really have this constantly evolving process. And the reason why NIST is so popular is because, it just works, right? In the sense that it's very generic, it's very vanilla. NIST's incident response framework is meant to be an acceptable and reproducible set of incident response guidelines, right? It sets out instructions so that wherever or whoever our organization is, or no matter the size or capabilities, we're still able to have an effective and coordinated response to security incidents. And because of this, it's also widely accepted by security auditors and different compliance standards and regulators. And so organizations and security solutions or appliances will often map to the NIST framework in some way or another, because these procedures are good to have in place and in writing, if auditors show up or if cyber insurance gets involved during or maybe after an incident. And so as we start to look at some other comparable models, the point is not to get hung up on choosing the right framework. Right? We want to really avoid this idea of analysis paralysis. In general, the point is to just have a framework, right? Have a plan. And in reality, organizations should just use the incident response lifecycle or framework or model that suits them best. But what it really comes down to is we just don't have a choice anymore, right? Incidents and intrusions are inevitable, and there's no excuse for any organization to be unprepared to strategically and quickly respond to them. Now, it's important to note that Revision 2 of the NIST 800-61 publication has been recently superseded. I believe as recently as April 2025, NIST published the special publication 800-61, Revision 3. Now, what NIST has done here is really introduced a newer approach to incident response and has started to move away from static guidance or, trusting in a single static publication due to how quickly and how often technology and incident response practices can change. Today, with incidents occurring much more frequently and causing far more damage than days of the past, incident response is really a part of cybersecurity risk management that should be integrated across the organization. And it should be integrated in a far more agile way. For example, the lessons learned during incident response should often be shared as soon as they're identified, right? We don't really want to delay that until after recovery concludes. And so we almost need a more continuous or more iterative approach to incident response. And so what we get here is a new incident response lifecycle model with a different layout and some additional concepts introduced. And so NIST breaks down the 6 incident lifecycle functions that are more or less based on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so we have govern, right, where the organization's risk management strategy, expectations, and policy are established, communicated, and monitored. We have identify, right, where the organization's current cybersecurity risks are understood. Protect, right, where safeguards to manage the organization's risks are implemented. Detect, of course, where potential attacks and intrusions are found and analyzed. Respond, right, so where actions regarding a detected cybersecurity incident are taken. And lastly, recover, where assets and operations affected by a cybersecurity incident are effectively restored. And the way that these areas are intended to interact with each other, the model essentially distinguishes between preparation and incident response activities. Right? And so the preparation activities of govern, identify, and protect are more broader cybersecurity risk management efforts that support, but are not part of the direct incident response process. Right? The actual incident response occurs at the top level here, and it includes things like detect, respond, and recover. Right? And between these levels, we have a focus on continuous improvement, which we can see represented by the improvement category with the identify function. And really, that's connected across all of these other functions by these sort of feedback loops, right, which we can see in these dashed green lines. And additionally, the lessons learned from any function, whether that be from preparation, detection, response, or recovery, all of this feeds back into the improvement process. Right? These lessons are going to be analyzed and prioritized and really used to update and refine our different policies and processes and practices across all areas of the organization. Right? And you can sort of see, the reason for this structure is, again, acknowledging that learning happens continuously throughout the entirety of an incident, right? Even in the middle of an incident. For example, identifying additional compromised systems, or maybe discovering a new threat or vulnerability in the network. And so by having an IR model that encourages and allows for immediate communication of these findings and insights, it really enables organizations to adjust their cybersecurity and incident response strategies in real time. And if we want to see where each of these functions map I guess you could say, within the old NIST lifecycle, NIST has a handy chart here, which I think really helps bridge the gap. And at the end of the day, again, no matter which framework or model you choose, we're still talking about the same core goal, right? And that's dealing with cybersecurity incidents effectively. Under the hood, both models here include the same steps and the same functions, maybe just with different ways of structuring and approaching incident response in real time. Again, what matters most here isn't picking the perfect model, but it's actually having a model in place and using it. Specifically, this updated model here, based on the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, is a useful approach, especially for organizations already aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework. But throughout the course, we'll keep both of these models in mind as a reference, while really focusing on the practical aspects of responding to and managing incidents. On the other hand, the SANS Institute for years has offered a well-known and widely adopted incident response framework, which stems from their white paper research and kind of popularized by many of their training. And while the SANS 6-step incident response process is similar to the one found in the NIST Computer Security Incident Handling Guide, SANS gets a bit more granular in the breakdown of different phases or steps compared to NIST, and offers additional focus on certain areas. And so it can be a better way to understand at a more granular level what individual steps go into our response. But no matter their slight differences, all of these frameworks share the same overarching goal of preparing, improving, and standardizing the incident response process. And so on the SANS side, you can see how it's quite similar, but it's a bit more detailed or a bit more verbose, especially as it comes to those three middle sections that NIST rolls into one. And the way I like to remember this framework is with the acronym PICURL or PICURL, however you want to pronounce it. But in essence, really, we have preparation, right? Identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. And what I've done here is sort of keep the same colors from that initial NIST framework, so you can sort of see how they map together, right? And so really, the only changes we have here are within those middle sections. Right, so the preparation stage is more or less consistent across the two models. The detection and analysis stage really just maps over to identification. Containment, eradication, and recovery map to their own individual stages in the SANS model. And lastly, post-incident activity really just maps over to lessons learned. And so I don't want to get too in-depth and spend too much time talking through these steps at a high level, because that can get a little dry, right? I know some of you are probably looking at this and thinking, PICURL, all right, we've heard this before, right? And so it can start to feel like we're just beating a dead horse. But instead, we're going to revisit and map these concepts throughout the entire course in a much more practical and hands-on way. Right? We can sit around discussing models and frameworks all day long, but when an actual incident happens, what really matters is what do we do, right? We need to know things like, how do we collect evidence across potentially hundreds or thousands of systems at scale? How can we quickly triage evidence and collect key artifacts remotely? And how can we analyze that data efficiently and effectively, right? How can we investigate a compromised endpoint forensically to determine the root cause and identify the scope and the impact of an incident? How do we contain the threat, right? Sort of stop the bleeding and prevent it from spreading across the network? And once that's done, how do we eradicate the threat completely and recover operations securely? And that's where the real value is, taking these high-level models and translating them into action. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on as we work through the course. But again, just quickly, let's break down the individual steps just so it's nice and fresh in our minds.